Good morning, everybody. This is Kanti Srikanth from COG Boardroom. We have another 3 more minutes before noon, so we will get started fairly soon. Thank you kindly. For all of you who have already signed on, we are expecting a few more to sign on in the remaining 3 minutes. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon,
Yes.
rather.
Good afternoon, Ms. Henderson. Thank you kindly. We already have about 26 members or alternates signed up. So we have, I think we are all set to go. Thank you kindly.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Christina Henderson. I'm this year's chair of the Transportation Planning Board. I'd like to call this TPB January 17th meeting to order. Welcome to all of you, and hopefully you are staying safe and very warm. I'm happy to have this opportunity to serve as the chair, and equally happy to have James Walkinshaw and Neil Harris as the vice chairs for the TPB this year. Let me start by recognizing some of the new members of the board. From the District of Columbia, I want to welcome my colleague, Councilmember Matt Fruman. From Maryland, I want to welcome Mayor of the City of Rockville, Monique Ashton. And from the Commonwealth of Virginia, I want to welcome Prince William County's Chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Deshandra Jefferson. And from Loudoun County, Laura Tacroni. Welcome to all of you. If we were in person, we would do a, but take our virtual claps for all it's worth. Is there anyone else new to the board that I might have missed?
Yes, Tom Ross, City of Fairfax. I'm now the primary. Alternate is Catherine Reed, our mayor.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Kristen Weaver, City of Greenbelt. I'm now the primary. I wasn't either the primary or the alternate before, and the mayor, Emmett Jordan, is the alternate.
Thank you, Kristen. Welcome. Anyone else? All right, Lynn, do they need to do something? Do you have the documentation you need?
So I already have most of their letters. So on their membership list, I had Kristen backwards with Emmett, and but take a look at the membership list that is posted on the meeting materials. And if that is incorrect, email me directly. I'm working with our other COG staff. What we need that's different than the other COG boards, because we are a federal organization, we need a specific letter from each of your entities, and most of you have provided it. And but again, that's just one more added step that we do to meet our regulations. Thank you, Ms. Henderson.
All right, thank you, Lynn. And I look forward to a great year working with everyone. So we're virtual today. I know the plan was for us to be hybrid, in-person, virtual, but with the snow in the region, we just switched to a virtual. So we're going to start with a roll call of board members participating in today's meeting, and then also to confirm that we have a quorum. After that, we'll accept comments from the publics, and then we'll continue through the rest of the agenda. Just sort of some ground rules, lay of the land, since we do have some new folks. During the agenda items, we will have presenters complete their briefing, and then we'll turn to members for questions or comments. We call on members by jurisdiction. So you could just use your raised hand icon and we can go from there. But first and foremost, the roll. Lynn?
Great, thanks, Ms. Henderson. So I'm going to state your jurisdiction or agency, if you could state your name. And we'll also capture a few folks that did come to the building today. So starting with the District of Columbia, District Council Charles Allen.
Here.
Thank you. District Council Ms. Christina Henderson.
Present.
Thank you. District Council Matt Fruman. Thank you. District Department of Transportation.
Anna Chamberlain here.
Anna Chamberlain, gotcha, thank you. District Office of Planning.
Rebecca Schwartzman, present.
Thank you. Moving on to Maryland, the City of Bowie.
I could see myself. I think I'm in.
Charles County.
Ruben Collins, present.
I see it.
Yes. City of College Park.
Denise Mitchell, present.
Thank you. Frederick County.
Mark Meschler, present.
Thank you. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
Thanks, Kelly. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is here.
And Neil Harris, I believe, is online.
We got Neil Harris online and Dennis Enslinger in the room. City of Greenbelt.
Kristen Weaver, present.
Thank you. City of Laurel. Montgomery County.
Gary Ehrenrich is present, and I expect Haley Peckett to also be in attendance.
Thank you.
This is Haley. I'm here as well.
Thank you. Prince George's County.
Victor Weisberg, present.
Thanks, Vic. Anyone else? Prince George's County. Okay. City of Rockville. City of Tacoma Park. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Heather's here.
Thanks, Heather. Maryland House of Delegates. And Maryland Senate. We've been made aware they're in session and that they weren't planning to attend, but we'll keep an eye out in the participant chat if they were able to, or in the list. Thanks. Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Kanick, present.
Kenick, thanks, Kenick. Arlington County.
Takis, present.
Thanks, Takis. City of Fairfax.
Present, Tom Ross.
Thanks, Tom. Fairfax. So Fairfax County is having a retreat today. Is there anyone from Fairfax County? Would they? Okay. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder here for City of Falls Church.
Thank you. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger here.
Thank you. Loudoun County.
Mike Turner's here in the boardroom.
Thank you.
Rob Donaldson's also here online.
Thank you. City of Manassas. Expecting Ralph virtual, so I'll keep an eye out for Ralph. City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Thanks, Jeanette. Prince William County. Virginia Department of Transportation. I see Bill Cutler on the virtual. Virginia House of Delegates. Yeah, and Virginia Senate. We've been made aware they're in session. Also WMATA. Lastly, WMATA.
Elaine Allison Davis here.
Got Allison, thank you. Okay, ex officio, Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration.
Koenig, FTA.
Thanks, Dan. National Capital Planning Commission. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And National Park Service. Great, that concludes roll call. Again, if I've missed you, we're keeping an eye out in our participant list. And we have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. We'll now move on to the second item of our agenda, which is the approval of the December 20th, 2023 meeting. meeting minutes. We have been provided a summary of this in the meeting packet. I trust that members have reviewed the minutes. I move that we adopt the minutes of the December 20th, 2023 meeting as provided. May I have a second?
Second, Madam Chair, Tax Current Attorneys, Wellington County.
Thank you. Are there any corrections or additions that folks have? All right.
I don't see any hands raised.
Great. So we'll move on to the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions from the District of Columbia? Maryland? Virginia? Any of the other agencies? All right, hearing none, the meeting minutes are adopted. We'll now move to the third item on the agenda, which is the technical. Oh,
Just quick, so as part of item one, we still need to do comments and public comment. So we have one member of the group, so it's still informational. So there's one member of the public that registered to speak, and that's Bill Pugh. And then I have, we got one comment online that I'd like to summarize. So maybe you can invite Bill Pugh to speak.
yes, apologies, I overlooked that. Bill, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair Henderson and TPB board members. I'm Bill Pugh with the Coalition for Smarter Growth. On your agenda today are two important items related to climate change. And we all know that transportation is the largest source of emissions in this region. A year and a half ago, this board took a major step in setting a very strong greenhouse gas reduction goal, specifically for cars and trucks. This was a standout among MPOs across the country and continues to be. But we've seen some disappointing signs at the world and national level. Last year in the US, transportation emissions actually rose 1.6%, while emissions in other sectors decreased. And at the world level, we know that the commitments made by nations won't get us to safe levels of greenhouse gases, which means it's even more important for regions like metropolitan Washington to meet its climate change commitments. So on your agenda today, there are 2 items where you can make more progress and ensure that you're meeting the really laudable commitments that you set a year and a half ago. And I'll also note another item on the agenda is the resilience work that TPB is doing, which has been really outstanding, and look forward to seeing more of the results. But first, what this board can do on the agenda today, the Unified Planning Work Program, as in the outline available, there aren't any activities that will track TPB's greenhouse gas target that it set. We encourage you to have an activity that would track the emissions and specifically the strategies, how TPB is doing and implementing the strategies it adopted. We know that there is a study that Conti told me about and expect results later this year, but we really need to move faster. It's been a year and a half since TPB adopted that. On the federal greenhouse gas rule, you'll get a briefing. This is an opportunity for TPB to set its own target for the federal target and to track that. On Visualize 2050, which the board will be working on this year and moving into analysis, this is an opportunity to not just track results in 2050, but also in 2030. How will the plan meet the board's commitments for 2030? And also, it's an opportunity this year to follow the lead of other jurisdictions and set a vehicle miles travel target like the state of Maryland has done. Again, I thank you for your work on climate and what we need to do a lot more. It's a tough issue, and I thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Pugh. Lynn, you have some other comments as well?
Yes, great. Thank you, Chair Henderson. Between noon Tuesday, December 19th and noon Tuesday, January 16th, yesterday, the TPB received one comment submitted via email. I'll summarize this comment, and it's found in its entirety on our webpage. Tad Aburn, a member of a DC Environmental Justice Coalition, directed his comments to the newly elected TPB membership. He submitted comments on behalf of that coalition, requesting that the new chairs respond to his comments where he stated that transportation-related air pollution hotspots in environmental justice communities of color are being created across the DC region by TPB transportation plans and projects. He states that national experts on this issue have called the air pollution levels in some DC EJ communities alarming. He is concerned and states that this critical issue is being ignored. He also provides supplemental information on land use and zoning, federal approvals, and additional scientific research. I'm happy to report that staff already responded to his previous comments, which include these comments as well, and that memo can be found in Conti's director's report under item 5, which you'll hear about soon. As I mentioned, all the comments are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report. Thank you, Chair Henderson.
Thanks, Lynn, and apologies for skipping over that. So we're now going to go to the third item on the agenda, which is the technical committee report. We have a written summary of the January 5th, 2024 meeting. I welcome Amy Gabarini, the new chair of the technical committee. Amy, would you please summarize the meeting report for us?
Thank you, Chair Henderson. The technical committee met Friday, January 5th, and you can find the written summary included in today's TPB meeting packet. The technical committee was briefed on 4 items that were reviewed for inclusion on today's TPB agenda. The first item was a review of the outline and preliminary budget for the FY25 Unified Planning Work Program, where a complete draft will be presented to TPB at the February meeting. Next was a briefing on the National Capital Trail Network, followed by an overview on the performance-based planning and programming rulemaking regarding greenhouse gas emissions on the national highway system. The recent federal rulemaking implements a performance measure for state DOTs and MPOs to track greenhouse gases as part of the PBPP framework. Another briefing was on the planning area boundary adjustment and resulting TPB membership change for Fauquier County. Additionally, 2 items were presented for information and discussion, including an update on Visualize 2050 and the public engagement period and status of project inputs. And lastly, there was a briefing on the Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation Strategy Project for prioritizing publicly accessible electric vehicle infrastructure for light-duty vehicles. And that concludes the technical committee report.
Thank you, Amy. Are there any questions for Amy? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to the 4th item on the agenda, which is the Community Advisory Committee report. We all have a written summary of the January 11th, 2024 meeting. The chair, Richard Wallace, would you like to highlight the report for us?
Hello, did you say Richard Wallace?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm sorry I got distracted there for a second. Happy New Year to everyone. Good afternoon, Chair. Again, my name is Richard Wallace, and I will be briefing on our meeting that was held, and I think that was on the, let's see, sorry about that, I'm gonna get my notes mixed up. Okay, so the January meeting of the 2023-24 TPB Meeting Advisory Committee was held on Thursday, January 10th. The meeting featured a briefing and discussion on the initial comments received for the Vitalize 2050 plan update, as well as discussion on last year's state of public transportation. And because of sake of time, I won't go into all of the questions that were there, could be nice in my report. But we also had we were briefed by Christina Finch and Jamie Bufkin of TPB staff, provided an update on the comments received during last year's public comments period on project inputs to the plan. This comment period extended from February 15th through November 30th of 2023 and was conducted on an open survey that did not use a statistical sampling method. Participation was open to any interested party, therefore, the input received cannot be considered statistically representative of the views of the region. And then after that, we were also briefed, regarding the state of the public transportation report. and by Pierre, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mess his name up. He's TPB transportation planner. He briefed on the committee on a new report that profiles each of the various transit systems in the region, including WMATA. Among other things, the report gets into the impact of the COVID pandemic. The committee briefly discussed the seriousness and the origin of WMATA's shortfall. Let's see. This concludes my inputs, and are there any questions?
Thanks, Richard. Does anyone have any questions for Richard?
I have a quick one. It may be for staff more than Richard, but relating to the report. I like the idea that we're doing survey work, but I'm wondering if there's a way we can do it to make it more scientific and less ad hoc.
Yes, Mr. Harris, this is Kanti Shrikant. I think the public comments that the TPB collected during 2023 between February and November, that was not essentially a survey. It was an open period of public comments that the members of the public could submit their comments via the TPB website or by email or by telephone. It was really a public comment. It was not a survey. When we do plan to undertake any survey, we will certainly aim to have it be statistically significant, either at the regional level or statistically significant at each of the member jurisdictions level. I agree. I support that suggestion. Thanks.
Thanks, Kanti. Neil, do you have a follow-up, or are you good?
I am good. Thank you.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. And I also want to thank you for your report, as well as for serving as chair of the committee for the past year. Richard will continue to serve on the CAC while we appoint a new chair for this year. As the chair of the board, it is my privilege to appoint a new chair for the Community Advisory Committee. After a review of the membership of the committee, I'm pleased to announce that I'm appointing committee member Ra Amin from the District of Columbia to serve as the chair. Ra has completed the TPB's Community Leadership Institute and is a member of the District ANC, or Advisory Neighborhood Commission, and he is serving his second stint on the CAC. He has attended almost all of the meetings last year and has a strong commitment to regionalism and advancing regional goals for equity. I believe Ra Amin will be an effective chair for the CAC this year, and so congratulations to him. I have one more appointment to announce. Members of the CAC serve a 2-year term that started last year. One of the members from the District of Columbia is unable to serve for a second year. So we worked with staff to review the applicants from last year and to select a person to fill the district's vacancy. I'm pleased to announce that I've recommended Zach Israel to serve on the CAC. Zach lives in Ward 4 in the district and served a term as an ANC commissioner. He's very engaged in local transportation issues, especially roadway safety. And so welcome Zach to the CAC for this year. All right, now we'll move on to the fifth item on the agenda, which is the steering committee actions and report from the director. So I'm going to turn to Kanti. We have his written report, but Kanti, if you would please review the report for us.
Certainly. Thank you, Ms. Chair and members of the board. On behalf of the staff, a hearty welcome to the new members of the board, and all of us on staff look forward to working with you during this year. A detailed report was included. I will briefly review the contents of this, and I'll be glad to respond to any questions on these topics. The steering committee met on January 5th and approved 4 amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. The first amendment, requested by the Virginia Department of Transportation, allocated $166,768 in additional funding from the Virginia portion of the Transportation Alternative Program funds that have been set aside for the TPB. And this additional funding was provided to the W&OD Trail Crossing Improvements Project in the city of Falls Church. Details of this are on pages 5 through 7 of my report. The second amendment by the District of Columbia added about $3.7 million to the citywide roadway reconstruction program, and the details of that are on pages 8 through 12. The third amendment was requested by Maryland Department of Transportation, which added about $2 million for the Alcona Street Bridge Rehabilitation Project in Prince George's County, and the details are on pages 13 through 16. And the last amendment that was approved was requested by the Virginia Department of Transportation, and that did three different things. Number one, it added about $652 million in funding from a variety of sources to the US 1 Bus Rapid Transit project. It also added about $16 million for Loudoun County to replace 37 buses, retrofit a bus maintenance facility so that it could accommodate compressed natural gas buses. And lastly, it added about $79 million to an ongoing Route 7 widening project, which would now also be able to accommodate bicycle and pedestrian facilities. The details of these three projects and amendments are on pages 17 through 25. Moving on, staff issued one letter of support for a project that is seeking federal RAISE program grant funding, and this project application was from Prince William County. And you can see a copy of that staff support letter on page 27. On page 29, you have the schedule of board meetings for this year. I would like to draw your attention particularly to the meeting day and date on 2 months, when the board meeting is going to be held on a slightly different day. The board usually meets on the third Wednesday of each month, except month of August. But in the month of March, we are proposing to hold the meeting on Thursday, March 21st, instead of 20th. And similarly, we are proposing to hold the June meeting on Thursday, June 20th, instead of 19th. The March meeting is also scheduled to have a work session, and that's an important meeting where we plan to review all of the new projects and programs submitted by your agencies, all 23 TPB member transportation agencies, for inclusion in the new long-range transportation plan that we are calling Visualize 2050. I would also like to remind members that the TPB is currently accepting applications from your agencies for 2 grants. One is the Transportation Land Use Connections Grant, and the other one is the Regional Roadway Safety Program. Applications are due by March 4th. And as an option, members can submit an abstract by January 24th. We know that the Regional Roadway Safety Program will have $300,000 in grants. The Transportation Land Use Connections Program will have a minimum of $300,000. We anticipate having additional money since in the past, Maryland Department of Transportation and Virginia Department of Transportation have provided additional funding. We hope to have some additional information on that fairly soon. And one last announcement, if I may, that was not included in my written report. The COG board received the interim report from the Chief Administrative Officer's work group on WMATA's cost structure earlier this month. Members will recall that in December, I had shared a copy of the draft interim report, which included about 8 specific recommended actions that WMATA and WMATA's members could take to address the deficit in operating funds that WMATA currently faces for its fiscal year 2025 budget. The COG board identified some immediate actions that would include the Maryland and Virginia legislatures, which are currently in session, taking action to reset the operating subsidy levels that would be used for developing the FY 2025 budget. That is a legislative action that is needed, and the COG board is calling on the two legislatures to make it a priority and enact that relief this year. The second action that the COG board called for is a clear statement of commitment for additional operational funding from the District of Columbia and Virginia for WMATA's fiscal year 2025 budget. Maryland's governor recently announced such a commitment of additional funding. And finally, the COG board also called on WMATA to work closely with member agencies to expeditiously implement all of the relevant recommendations. I mentioned there were 8 recommendations as it develops its revised FY 2025 operating budget. Finally, importantly, the COG board indicated its commitment to help address Metro's long-term fiscal health and sustainability. The COG board indicated that it plans to have a more comprehensive examination of the entire Metro system's funding model, including its governance, and it anticipates doing this work in 2024. Madam Chair, I would expect that the TPB might be called upon to support COG in this effort, and I will ensure that the board is briefed on this when more information becomes available. That concludes my report, Ms. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Kanti. Does anyone have any questions for Kanti from DC? Anyone from Maryland? Anyone from Virginia?
Madam Chair, Dave Snyder, City of Falls Church, request to Conti, and Madam Chair, what role do you see TPB playing in the Metro funding issue going forward? You mentioned the COG board, but we are, after all, the focus of transportation in the region. So I'm wondering what role you see us playing going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Thanks for the question. We are currently, at least I am at a staff level, in conversations with the executive director of COG board, because it was earlier this month that the COG board formalized their commitment to get involved at a more comprehensive evaluation. My suspicion, while those discussions are still going, what exactly would the scope of work be that the COG board would undertake? Who all would work with the COG board on that work activity? One of the things that, looking in the past, what the TPB has done is the TPB has provided technical and analytical support to the COG board. As you know, COG board works on a number of disciplines, but it has typically left the transportation aspects of its activities to the Transportation Planning Board. So it is I suspect that the TPB might be asked to work collaboratively with the COG board in getting at some of the technical aspects of the functioning, perhaps assist in some analytical way on assessing potential alternate sources of revenues. Those are the two areas that come to my mind. I don't believe that will be asked to play a role in evaluating the governance, alternative governance models, but those discussions are yet to take place, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. I do hope that this board will play a central role as we have in the past on Metro issues. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave. Does anyone from Virginia or the other agencies have any questions for Kanti? Okay, you guys are a quiet group today, which is fine. After a 4-day weekend for some of us. So we'll move on to item 6, which is the chairman's remarks. I do want to take a few minutes in this first meeting as chair to share some thoughts and hopes for the work we do as a board this year. This year, the board is scheduled to continue the task we started last year, and that's a thorough revision of the planned projects and programs in our long-range transportation plan, which we are calling Visualize 2050. I want to refresh some of our memories about this. So back in the fall of 2022, when we adopted an updated long-range transportation plan, the board collectively expressed its disappointment with the performance levels, the planned projects and programs in the plan was estimated to reach by 2045, be it on congestion levels or transit ridership or greenhouse gas reduction. The board at the time decided to have our transportation agencies, all 23 of them, to take back every project and program it had in the plan, re-examine it, and to determine whether or not they were still needed or what other changes could be made to provide better performance outcomes and propose new projects to make the progress better for our regional goals. Our transportation agencies have, over the past almost 8 months, done this, and later this year, we will review their submissions and begin the task of updating the current long-range transportation plan. Having this update work begin on schedule will be one of our priorities this year, and I look forward to working with all of you on that. The updated plan is scheduled to be adopted next year, and I want to make sure that the incoming chair next year can also make this happen. Related to this, I want to note that the region's largest transit system, WMATA's metro system, is facing some significant headwinds in terms of funding for its operations and with its maintenance program. You heard a little bit about that in the back and forth between Dave Snyder and Conti. While the region is working to come up with some operating funding fix for the next 2 years, the region will need to develop and put in place a more predictable funding stream for the long run. Our sister policy board in this region, the Council of Governments, is engaged in this work, and some of you on this board also serve on the COG board. In fact, TPB member Charles Allen is the chair of the COG board this year, and so I look forward to working closely with the COG board to provide technical assistance as needed to help put the region in the best place for a sustainable and predictable funding model for the long term. I know that as a federally established and funded board, we have several federally prescribed activities, and these have a certain cadence to them. Several such work activities will be coming to us this year, including some new ones, such as establishing specific greenhouse gas reduction targets required by the federal government and programming a new pot of federal funds to advance electrification in the regions. Advance electrification for vehicles in the region. I will work closely with staff to ensure that these are done not just as prescribed and on schedule, but also in a way that reflects additional thinking and work to advance our regional planning priorities. Of the other various priorities, I'm particularly interested in what we do to make our roadways much safer and address some of the transportation challenges and accessibility challenges for some of the traditionally underserved populations in our equity emphasis areas in the region. The number of fatalities and serious injury crashes on our region's roadways are simply not acceptable. I know for many of you, you guys have seen your numbers, and I know they have actually gone up here in the District of Columbia, and we're very far away from our our Vision Zero goals. The TPB has been focused on this over the past few years, and the Regional Roadway Safety Grant Program that we've created has been very effective, but I do believe that the board can do more to encourage all stakeholders to take this more seriously and to be much more aggressive in their approach. Similarly, the board's work on equity has also been quite good. So I mentioned, our equity emphasis areas, and this is a concept that the TPB has created and uses in its environmental justice analysis. And we've been recognized by the FAWA as well as the Federal Transit Administration for this work. The TPB member jurisdictions are using equity emphasis areas as a tool in other planning work such as housing, public safety, etc. And again, I do believe that we could be doing more to better understand the specific nature of transportation challenges in these areas, as well as how they interact with some other things, not just housing and public safety, but also food access. I've begun reviewing and discussing some of the work activities staff have planned for this year. And I have some thoughts on how we can leverage the work to make a push on these two priority areas that I've already mentioned. And so I look forward to closely working with the vice chairs in the steering committee and the staff to outline this more in detail. But overall, I thank you all for this opportunity to serve, and I look forward to your support and cooperation as we look to accomplish some of the things on our agenda for this year. That concludes the end of my report. And so we'll move on to some of the informational items that we have on the agenda. So item 7, which is a review of the outline and preliminary budget for the FY 2025 UPWP. Lynn Erickson on our staff will brief us on the annual statement of work, identifying the planning activities and activities to be carried out by the board, as well as our scope of work for the upcoming fiscal year. So Lynn, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Chair Henderson. So here comes our slide. Let's see if this works. Okay, great. When people ask you, what does the TPB do? What do you tell them? Anyone? Anyone? Normally there'd be people in the room, but I'm looking at a bunch of, little names. Anyway, if you tell them that the TPB does 3 main things, then you can just sit back and relax, since you could probably do this presentation yourself, but I am joking here. I've been either a board member or in this position working for the TPB for 19 years, and I'm still learning nuances of the process, so you're not alone. So 3 things. The TPB has a ton of federal requirements we have to meet. The TPB serves as a forum for regional coordination, and the TPB provides data to decision makers. The TPB's influence is indirect. So as we kick off the new year, I'd like to take the opportunity to elaborate on all the responsibilities that the TPB has, as we are the Federal Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia urban area, as well as for the urban areas of Frederick and Waldorf, Maryland. The Unified Planning Work Program is the TPB's annual budget, and it's the document where everything staff does and plans to do is actually written down. So this month, we're going to talk about the basic MPO requirements, which is essentially how you can navigate the process and get the most out of your time with us. And I will elaborate on what we can and frankly can't do as an MPO. The main takeaway from today's presentation is that I hope you will be reminded of the many federal requirements that we are responsible for together as a region in a continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive manner, and that every effort is made to try to synchronize board interests with our required products. Next month, I'll come back and talk about specific products and activities that we plan to undertake in fiscal 2025, which starts what seems like way off in the future, summertime, when it's warm, 6 months, so we're thinking ahead here. Anyway, the board will be asked to approve our UPWP in March. All right, so what exactly does the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process focus on? You're most likely familiar with your local planning, programming, and project selection processes, and in Virginia, there's another layer of sub-regional activities. Speaking of sub-regional, there are also many other entities that conduct planning and programming activities, like Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, WMATA, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and they all have their own roles, boards, and responsibilities. I call them sub-regional because they all come together here at the TPB at the metropolitan regional scale. The TPB does not participate in project development activities. The TPB does not look at individual projects. We do, however, look at them all together at the same time, and each project is an important piece of our regional puzzle. So if any of these local, sub-regional, or state agencies want to spend federal funding, or if their projects impact air quality, it doesn't matter how each of the projects came to be, they have to be part of the TPB's process. It's the separate regional federal metropolitan transportation planning process that we focus on here at TPB. We do ask you to think regionally, but then back home locally. And staff is here to help you. So the mission, if you will, of an MPO has largely been defined for us by our federal partners. It's to implement the Federal Metropolitan Transportation Planning Process, 23 CFR Part 450 Subpart C, and 49 CFR Part 613. We serve as a representative group of local stakeholders. We carry out the 3C process. It's a continuing process. It basically never stops. For example, members come and go and look around at our new faces. I'm aware of a couple new folks. We have one in our room, Mr. Turner right over there. It's cooperative, it's consensus-based, it's comprehensive, it's multimodal and multidisciplinary. We are required to develop a long-range plan and a short-range transportation improvement program. We are required to demonstrate how projects in both are paid for, otherwise known as fiscal constraint. We are required to apply a specific air quality conformity analysis on the projects in both. We are also required to engage in performance-based planning and programming, otherwise known as PBPP, which is the application of performance management principles to achieve desired performance outcomes for our multimodal transportation system. These requirements also specify how to develop these products and what exactly needs to be addressed in them. We also work in conjunction with state air and transportation agencies to meet federal Clean Air Act standards in accordance with 40 CFR Part 93. Okay, great. So we have all these rules to follow, but what does that actually mean? So the process is supposed to shape what goes into those plans and programs. So let me say that again. The process is supposed to shape what goes into those plans and programs, both now and into future plans and programs. So this means taking your projects that were developed at the local, sub-regional, or state level and looking at them through our regional lens, using our regionally established policies like our environmental justice and equity lens, and providing that information to you as the implementing agencies to use as those projects move forward and as you are making decisions about what projects to fund next. Gentle reminder, transportation projects take years, plural, to develop and implement. So actually, most of the data that we provide to you now will shape our future plans and programs. So why do the details matter here? So if you look at this map, every project in this massive 3,500 square mile area, or if your agency plans to fund it with federal funding, or if a project impacts air quality, doesn't matter how each one of these projects evolved. They still have to be part of our process. Also, remember, by the time a project is even qualified to be part of the TPB's process, some level of public approval has already occurred. There is $223 billion forecasted in our long-range transportation plan, Visualize 2045, and planned to be spent in the region over the next 21 years. And right now, there's currently $21 billion that you have programmed in the current fiscal 2023 to 2026 TIP. And that money is already approved by your agencies to be spent. But not a dime of that funding can flow or be spent in your region without your agency putting it in our TIP after you approve it and demonstrate fiscal constraint or without our process. So who are we? We have 44 members. We are the 9th largest MPO in the nation in population, the 16th largest in planning area. As part of the 3C process, again, we do 3 main things here at TPB. We prepare plans and programs that the federal government must approve in order for federal aid transportation funding to flow to our region. We provide technical resources for consensus building and decision making, and we provide a forum for regional coordination. So as you know, we have a lot of federal checkboxes that must be checked. However, there are also opportunities to synchronize board interests along with those federal regulations. One example is our approval of the greenhouse gas reduction goals and strategies, which are included in our plan, but are not federally required to even be in the plan. Now, I'm reminding you of all these responsibilities because these are some of the things we need to focus on as we prepare our staff workload for the next year. So how do we plan and document the staff workload for next year? We do this through our Unified Planning Work Program. This is the document that defines how we carry out the MPO activities and what exactly they are. Basically serves as the TPB staff work scope for the upcoming fiscal year. The UPWP is one of only a few documents that the US DOT actually approves, and it provides the federal authority to draw down the guaranteed MPO federal funding so staff can conduct the process and keep the transportation system funded. I do want to point out that we had a super successful federal audit last year on our process called the Federal Certification Review. This is where the feds certified that we are in fact meeting and exceeding their expectations for how the TPB is conducting the metropolitan transportation planning process. So that's a good thing. We're doing the right thing. All right. Next month, I will spend some time highlighting the proposed revenues and expenditures, but right now we start our budget process assuming that we're going to get about the same amount of funding, including the IIJA bump up we got last year. So we can reasonably make this assumption because there's only one way to spend metropolitan transportation funding, and it automatically comes to MPOs like us. However, unlike other MPOs in the United States, we actually only get the bare minimum, and that funding is wholly directed to conducting the metropolitan transportation planning process. So MPO expenditures, what are you getting for your money? And I say you getting your money because everyone at the table at least provides a 10% match based on your jurisdiction's population. The state DOTs pick up a larger tab than the rest of you. They pay 10% on behalf of all the jurisdictions in each state. The federal government is paying the other 80%. So first off, we are essentially staffed to you, our members. Our talented staff of about 50 people focus completely on the sometimes extremely technical work, and we are always ready to help you with these complicated transportation planning topics. Slide 7 here tries to summarize how all of our work fits together, all while making sure we're keeping our federal and state oversight partners happy. We spend a lot of our resources generating data and information, quality checking it and flowing it, if you will, just follow the arrows across the chart here, between and among our various products. So this month, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what our ongoing activities are. And in February, I'll highlight the new activities we'll be undertaking next year. Now for the fun stuff, what we do every year. This is our committee and subcommittee structure. We utilize our 14 subcommittees to help us both disseminate and get feedback on data, information, and products to make sure that we are on the right track with your needs and with the federal requirements. We provide a forum for regional coordination. All of our tasks contain some amount of coordination activities. This means bringing staff from 44 member agencies and jurisdictions together for meetings, and it's also working within our agency to more fully utilize our strengths across our teams and departments. We spend a lot of time organizing and hosting these various subject matter expert committees, not only to help us check our federal boxes, but to provide you with opportunities you wouldn't otherwise have. The single best way to navigate our process is to pay attention to what is going on at the committees and to read our TPB News blog post. So we're hoping you meet regularly with your technical committee rep because we know that 2 hours a month is probably not enough time to fully understand and appreciate all that we have to offer at TPB. Also, another tidbit, it's the staff intent that every action item appears on the TPB agenda twice. First as a heads up and then the next month for approval. We are regional representative government, which means that each member at the table is representing their entire jurisdiction or agency. So we absolutely recognize how difficult it can be when there are last minute text changes or anything weird happening. So don't hesitate to ask about potential unintended consequences at any point in time. TPB funds and implements regional programs by providing consultant services to members in several program areas. We seek to enhance transportation and land use coordination through our Transportation Land Use Connections Program, TLC, where we support planning for vibrant and accessible communities. This technical assistance program has provided our jurisdictions with consultant support for 177 projects since 2007, more than $8 million. A good example of synchronizing board interests is how we developed our relatively new Regional Roadway Safety Program. Through our performance-based planning and programming safety discussions, safety was identified as a priority, and we were able to provide an opportunity to start to address what we can. The RRSP, Regional Roadway Safety Program acronym, has funded 22 projects since 2020 for nearly $1.3 million. And both the TLC and RRSP solicitations are currently underway now, so get your applications in. TPB implements programs on behalf of members. We promote transportation alternatives through our Commuter Connections program, our bicycle and pedestrian programs, and through our responsibilities for the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program grants, also called TAP. So the TPB offers 2 federal grant opportunities. One is TAP, where we've selected 154 projects for DC, Maryland, and Virginia since 2014 for a total of nearly $70 million. And next month will be Virginia's turn. The TPB's Enhanced Mobility Grant Program aims to improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities throughout the region by removing barriers to transportation services and expanding transportation mobility available options. Since 2014, the program has funded 126 projects, distributing $45 million in federal funding, including the 23 projects you guys just awarded last month. So altogether, that's more than $117 million worth of projects the TPB has selected for the region. As a forum for coordination, we are strategically set up to facilitate and implement various regional initiatives. For example, one of the TPB's focus areas is mitigating climate change, which is part of our mobile emissions planning activities. We coordinate with the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, otherwise known as MWAC. We will continue to support the climate action planning activities of the Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee, or CEPC, which reports to the COG board. Robust safety activities continue, following up on the TPB's Regional Roadway Safety Policy, which was established in Resolution R3-2021, and we provide the opportunity to have other policy discussions, including Resolution R18-2022, which details our greenhouse gas reduction goals and strategies specific to the on-road transportation sector. Our emergency preparedness and management operation activities feature planning activities in support of our MATOC program. Here are some examples of the technical resources we provide. We provide travel monitoring and travel trends analysis, travel demand forecasting, mobile emissions planning, and we support multimodal initiatives. We are developing the Generation 3 travel model, which will be TPB's next generation travel demand forecasting model. Additionally, each year we get 50 to 70 requests for the regional travel demand forecasting model, its inputs or its outputs. We are moving towards data-driven performance outcomes. We provide travel, traffic, and demographic analysis and data sets and visualizations. We provide a variety of communications tools to help us and help you get the word out, including our TPB News publication and our active social media presence, including infographics and videos we've developed that you can use to help describe what you do at the TPB. So here we go. This is the end. Our next steps are to develop the revenues and expenditures, and we'll come back to you next month with another document for review. There's a lot of background that goes into that document, but there's a memo in your meeting packet that actually includes the part of the UPWP that just describes the work activities. So it's sort of like I call it the heart of the UPWP. It's 20 pages, not 100, of just what the TPB staff are going to be focused on. And this time around, we highlighted specific new activities in that bulleted list that you can find on the meeting page. So all of the bullets and tasks in this memo will get wrapped into the big draft document, and you will be reviewing that next month. My February presentation will highlight those revenues and expenditures and go into a level of detail on each of those projects. So we're going to be, the other piece of this is we're going to be identifying what activities won't be able to be completed or accomplished by June 30th this year. So we take steps to roll that over into the fiscal 2025 UPWP, and we call that carryover. So I'll talk a little bit more of that about next month. So after board approval in March, we submit the document to the feds and work begins on July 1st. So Chair Henderson, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lynn, for that, I think, very detailed, I would call it like TPB 101 presentation. Does anyone have any questions? All right. I don't hear or see any, so we look forward to part 2 of the presentation at a future date. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Andrew Meese on our staff will review the update to the National Capital Trail Network. This is one of TPB's initiatives for Visualize 2045. We will be asked to approve the update at our meeting next month. So this update is important in preparation for that vote. So Andrew, when you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Chair Henderson and members of the board. I'm here today to discuss the National Capital Trail Network update that was completed as of December 2023 and is going to be ready for your approval next month. Today, I'm also joined by my colleagues Charlene Howard and Michael Farrell, who may be able to answer any technical questions that are raised. Today, today's presentation is in three parts. First, I will give a little history of the National Capital Trail Network. Then we'll present the facts and figures of this 2023 update and give a preview of a web page that contains the information and talk about next steps. So what is the National Capital Trail Network? It is a regional level, long distance continuous network of facilities that are low stress, so they're good quality, many riders of many ages and abilities are going to be able to ride on them. It bolsters our region's bicycle and pedestrian opportunities, which is clean and inexpensive, and we're aiming to serve the footprint of the region and some of the priority areas as well. So this emphasizes regional interconnectivity. It is, I'll point out, a subset of all of the region's bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And I would contrast it to another product that the TPB approved a couple of years ago, our Regional Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, which is sort of a comprehensive look at all sorts of facilities for all sorts of purposes. This is a limited, prioritized network that is created here in the National Capital Trail Network. The history of this was that this was inspired back in 2018 when the TPB was looking at aspirational initiatives. They were aware of a set of inner jurisdictions that had created the concept of a national capital trail in the region center, and decided to encourage the TPB have a region-wide network called the National Capital Trail Network. So that was our first edition of that was adopted by the TPB in July of 2020. And so that has been published and that has been used by you as members to, prioritize projects, as well as when the TPB has had these funding or grant decisions to make, there was an ability to give priority to projects that were on the defined National Capital Trail Network. We are looking at the progress toward implementation, and it was always envisioned to update this periodically, both in terms of the status of completion of the network, as well as technical corrections or updates to the network, which all come from our member agencies' plans and programs. This is all rolled up from what you have committed to in your plans. So in 2023, we updated the map. Those are simple words, but it was a long and complex process of getting a lot of technical detail and trying to get the information technically as correct as we could, involving our bicycle and pedestrian subcommittee, our GIS staff. And I did want to point out that in addition to this PowerPoint, there is a memo in your packet that explains some of this information. This leads us to a map, and I'll return to this in a second. What I would like to point out on this slide is the fact that we do have a network that reaches to all of our jurisdictions across the region and has a balance of segments that are already existing and open to use, and segments that are planned and encouraged for future investment. An interesting point is it's now 2024. What's happened since 2020 when this was adopted? So let's take a look at that. This slide has a couple of complexities, so I wanted to spend a second on it. But definitely in the upper right there is sort of the big conclusion, which is that since 2020, 83 miles of the planned network went to completed. They're completed and open to traffic. So open to use, I should say. And that's a rate of about 27 miles a year. That brings us, I guess I should say that in addition to the change in status, we worked with all of your staffs to try to update the definition of the National Capital Trail Network, which is what we're proposing today, including the updated network. And there are additional miles that have been proposed, and some of those already existed. And there are a number of reasons. Plans changed at the local level. Better routes were chosen. New evidence came to light to it suggests some changes there. So we've taken the opportunity to include those. So as of 2023, the network as proposed, 49% existing, 51% planned. And I would point out that at the current rate of completion over these last 3 or so years, it would take about 30 years to complete the National Capital Trail Network. So looking at, if you remember that map that we just saw, and looking at that in proximity to the TPB and COG policy priorities, are we serving those geographic areas? And this is a buffer analysis. This is an aerial analysis of whether zones that are defined as this following list are within a half a mile of the National Capital Trail Network as defined, which could be existing or could be a planned segments. And you can see those for, I guess, policy priorities, starting with the equity emphasis areas, the regional activity centers, the high capacity transit areas, and the transit access focus areas. And all of those, we're well into the 90% that are within that half-mile buffer. So we think that that we've been able to define a network that is supporting these policy areas. Next, this is a population analysis, 2020 versus 2030, the projected, and within that half-mile buffer, as done in this aerial analysis, we're at about 64% of the population by 2030 and 72% of the employment. I'd like to point out that these are analytical assumptions of a half-mile buffer that was used in this analysis. This is an as the crow flies kind of analysis, and a more resource-intensive analysis that we're able to gather and use network routing instead of airline distance could yield modestly different results. So we consider these as general results and not precise. There could be different methods that you could use to estimate this. We think that this is a fairly conservative estimate of the population and jobs served by the network, but there could be some, if you took a stricter definition of on-network access, it could be a little bit less. Next, I want to call your attention to the National Capital Trail Network webpage that our GIS staff has created. And I believe Leo is putting a link to this in the chat. This link is also in your memo in the mail out packet. We are not going to live demonstrate this today because of some of the technical challenges that we've experienced in trying to demonstrate these live pages. So I'm going to show a couple of screenshots and recommend that you go take a look at this yourself. So this is the first, if you open this up, this is the view that you should see with this map, with the colors indicating planned or existing parts of the network. And there's also a slider that can slide across the map where you can compare the 2020 network to the proposed 2023 update. There's also zooming capabilities and so forth. So this is hopefully much better for your review than a PDF or a static map would be. In the site, if you can scroll down, and you can also, there's a couple of tabs that you can hit across the top, and it has some explanatory information about the National Capital Trail Network. This is some of the numbers that I just went over, the total mileage, existing and planned, what's been completed since 2020, and some of the population served. I particularly call your attention to this part of the web page where we've interlinked with some of the TPB and COG policy areas here, the TPB vision, Visualize 2045, the aspirational initiatives, and Region Forward. And some of the language is quoted there that supports bicycles and pedestrians in the region, and how the National Capital Trail Network as a concept supports these various policy initiatives. And below, you can get a sort of a peek of it there. There's only so much we could do in these screenshots. Some of the numbers that I just went over a minute ago with the proximity to our policy areas. Next, I'm just going to give you a peek. There are a couple of success stories on the web page to sort of bring this to life, not just the sheer numbers. And I'm actually going to use regular slides and not the screenshot to go over these three for you. So what these are three projects that have been completed since this was conceptualized in 2020, and they each give a good illustration of why the National Capital Trail Network is important and helpful for the region. And the first is the I-66 parallel trail, and this was dramatic, and that is certainly the longest piece of facility that was completed in this time frame. 18 miles of trail along I-66 with many connections, much access, and of course, just by the sheer distance, a long connectivity. We connect to the WNOD and Custis trails, and now allows a very long continuous connectivity there. At the opposite end, but still very important, is a little missing link that's added in that can really make a dramatic difference. And this case, this is the College Park Woods Trail, connector trail, and this relatively short connector opened up, a whole residential area to connectivity to trails that go to the University of Maryland and beyond, to regional trails all the way down to the Anacostia tributary trail system. And this helped the bicyclists and pedestrians avoid some much less than ideal alternate routes that they had to use before. And the third example that was in these success stories was the Frederick Douglass Bridge. And we're always glad for opportunities where major infrastructure projects include the bicycle and pedestrian components, which is true in this Frederick Douglass Bridge example in the District of Columbia, and it connects to existing trails on both sides of the Anacostia River and really enhances the mobility and accessibility of that area of the District of Columbia. So those are the examples that are that we've presented today and that are also on the web page you can review. Also on the web page, some background information on the National Capital Trail itself. With that, I'd like to turn to the outlook for next steps. So this is being presented in draft form to you today. If you do have any questions or comments, it would be helpful to have those by February 9th, which is a Friday. And we can bring this back if there's time available at the February 21st TPB meeting for your approval. And so you'll be approving the update of the updated map, if you will, updated definitions of the National Capital Trail Network. And we're not going to rest after that, because we're going to start right away for the rest of the year for yet another technical update, get new information, because there's completions, there's changes all the time. So we're going to try to keep up with that as best we can as the staff. And that'll be in conjunction this year. I did mention the bicycle and pedestrian plan, which is the more comprehensive database, where we've worked hard to get that get that together, and we'll be updating that as well this year. Again, thanks to my colleagues who did the lion's share of the work on this, and to all of you and your staffs for the input to this. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone have any questions for Andrew based on his presentation? Again, we will be asked to approve the update next month at our meeting. I see Tom Ross.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that presentation. I'm thrilled to see this kind of thing moving forward as an old trail professional with the National Park Service for many years. This is a really important asset for our community. Two questions I had. One is, I couldn't really, even though I was trying, and I will go on the website to see whether or not the city of Fairfax has the George Snyder Trail identified on this. That is a new trail segment which will connect from east or from west to east, the Route 66 trail, which feeds into the city, to the Cross County Trail, Fairfax County, 2-mile segment. It's in the plans. We've approved all but construction for this project, although there is some continued discussion going on in the community, but I wondered whether that had been included, and if so, is there a way we could get that included in the before the February action? Second question relates to statistics on trail usage. Do we have any way of measuring the use of this trail, and in terms of bicyclists, pedestrians, that sort of thing on a regional basis? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ross. This is Kanti. I'll take your second point on the trail usage. We do have, we work closely with the member agencies and with the state DOTs on compiling all of the trail counts that we have. And we also provide technical assistance by going out to the trails and doing periodic counts on the usage of those trails. So we have some data. It's an ongoing work. It's being done every year. I wouldn't say that it covers every element of the trail, or certainly it is not a representative of all the trail usage. But there is a program. Some of the data we gather, some of the data is gathered by the individual transportation agencies, but we do compile all of them in one place. And we are constantly looking to expand that usage data collection. On your first question, it's Andy mentioned previously, there are two parts to the TPB's trail network. One is the complete regional bike ped trail system. That is a very comprehensive, much more than the 1,500-mile segment that we just shared with you today. That is a comprehensive compilation of every trail that is either planned or built in each of the 23 member jurisdictions. So that is likely the place where we can find this new City of Fairfax trail. If it is new, if it has not yet been added, that is the work that Andy said that we will continue to update that document. So there is a place where that particular trail will be captured. How is the National Capital Trail Network different? It is a subset of this larger document. There was, back in 2018, a set of criteria defined. The intent here is to say, of the 4,000 or 5,000 miles of bike ped trails that we in the region, our 23 member jurisdictions intend to build, can we identify a subset of that as something that is a priority? How do we define a trail to meet that priority? So there was a set of criteria that was designed. So if this Fairfax County new trail, the 2-mile segment that you talked about, if it meets that criteria, it would be in this. If it is not, it would not be part of the National Capital Trail Network, but it would still be part of the TPB's regional trail network.
Okay, I understand, I guess. I would be helpful for me to see that criteria so that we can consider whether or not this trail would fit into the essence of the National Capital Trail Network. Because from our perspective, it's a key link that provides a direct access to the two components I mentioned, the Cross County Trail in Fairfax County and the Route 66 trail. Thank you. Appreciate that information.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I think I saw someone had their hand up in the room.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a generally wise rule that new people should never ask questions. Not one that I've ever particularly adhered to, so at the risk of making a fool out of myself. We have a north-south connector between Route 7 and Route 50 in Loudoun County. It's Belmont Ridge Road. It's going to become North Star Boulevard, and it's a connection. We have a pretty robust trail network, and the WOD cuts right through Loudoun County, as you know. But right now, we have a broken link over the Dulles Greenway that I have not been able in 4 years to figure out how to get funding for or priority. Is that the kind of thing that the National Capital Trails Network would be interested in? I'd be interested in talking to staff on how I could introduce that broken link into some sort of a discussion, because it connects everything north of the Greenway to the metro station at Ashburn Metro. It would be a wonderful broken link to fix.
So there are two parts to your question. I'll answer the latter part and ask staff to confirm whether that particular trail is already in. If not, as I said to Mr. Ross, we'll be happy to look at the specific trail that you're mentioning, make sure that how it compares with the criteria and if it has been included. But in general, the TPB's idea, when it came up with this concept of National Capital Trail Network and advised staff to develop this network, we developed this network working with the trails planning staff of all of the 23 member jurisdictions and WABA and a couple other regional entities. But the idea was that this particular trail network we would urge or request our member agencies to treat these trails as a priority when it comes to making transportation funding investment decisions. Every trail is important, but if you particularly focus on these, because they are so close to more than 90% of them are close to either an activity center, high capacity transit station, and equity emphasis areas, and conceivably, it is possible to go from one corner of this region to the other corner entirely on this trail network. So that was the idea. So to answer your question, if funding for that piece of trail, if that is already on the National Capital Trail Network, or if it is eligible to be, that is one way to use the TPB's National Capital Trail Network designation.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Takis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of triggered by hearing WNOD and funding by my colleague in Loudoun. So this is more of a short comment rather than a question. We have a session of the General Assembly right now in Virginia, and there is a bill, HB 557, carried by Delegate Hope, that essentially seeks to prohibit the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority from funding those trails when they cross, when they are in public parks, recreation areas, and other protection areas, despite the fact that we're never going to be tired to explain that any planning and designing of these trails complies with all possible and imaginable environmental safeguards, et cetera, et cetera. So this bill is still alive. So for the awareness of my Virginia colleagues, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority at its last meeting was pretty set to oppose that. I oppose that, and we will be talking about that down in Richmond, I think. I should say, talking about trails, in Arlington we have several. I was reminded that some of them even carry more people than some of our residential streets. So this is an important piece of our transportation infrastructure and connection network. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Takis. That I think is definitely something for folks to track, particularly in the Virginia delegation, what happens there. I don't see any other questions for Andrew. So we'll move on to the next item of the agenda. Thank you, Andrew. The next is TPB's Transportation Resiliency Planning Program. Catherine Ranoff staff will provide an update on regional transportation resilience planning program activities, specifically progress to date on the development of the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, also known as TRIP. Transportation Resiliency Planning is a new program activity for the TPB established in the previous fiscal year, and so it's timely with the impact of climate change that we're all experiencing. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, TPB board members, and thank you, Chair, for the time to present today. As the chairwoman said, I'm Catherine Raynon, the Transportation Resilience Planner here at TPB, and I'm looking forward to providing an update on where we are with our Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan today. So here's just a quick agenda about what I'll be discussing. First, a brief reminder of what we mean when we're talking about resilience and vulnerability when it comes to transportation systems in the region for this work, and an overview of what this TRIP project is and why we're doing it, followed by a general timeline of the process overall. I'll then provide a high-level overview of the methodology for the risk-based vulnerability assessment that was completed over the summer, followed by various other components of the project that have been completed to date. I'll then wrap up with next steps for the rest of the winter and spring, which includes an ask for all of you here today. First off, let's just review quickly the definitions of two terms I'll be using a lot over both the course of this presentation and for the lifetime of this program, and those are vulnerability and resilience. There are a lot of definitions for these two terms, so I wanted to share how FHWA defines these terms. Vulnerability is the degree to which a system is susceptible to or unable to cope with adverse effects of natural hazards. Vulnerability analyses examine which elements of the transportation system are exposed to potential natural disaster and climate hazards, how sensitive the system is to potential impacts from those hazards, and the degree to which the system is prepared to adapt to those impacts. FHWA defines resilience as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions to natural hazards. Although such disruptions to the region's transportation system can have many causes, for the sake of this presentation and the study that we're currently working on, we are focusing on disruptions only relating to natural hazards, like extreme heat or cold, extreme storm events, and flooding of all kind, coastal, flooding from rivers and streams, and flash floods that can occur away from bodies of water. In 2022, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, established the PROTECT program, which stands for Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, and established formula and discretionary grant programs with the purpose of planning for and strengthening surface transportation to be more resilient to natural hazards, including climate change, sea level rise, flooding, extreme weather events, and other natural disasters through both non-competitive and competitive grants. One of the components of the PROTECT program is the idea of a resilience improvement plan, which has the unfortunate acronym of RIP or RIP. So we added a transportation to the front of it, making it a Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan with the updated, more palatable acronym of TRIP. This optional component of PROTECT comes with the benefit for agencies and localities implementing transportation projects to gain access to benefits of this program by reducing the local match for a project that is funded by a PROTECT grant by 7% if that project is prioritized in a TRIP, and a further 3% if the TRIP is adopted into TPB's long-range transportation plan, meaning that a funded project that normally would have had to kick in 20% of the total cost may only have to cover 10%. Some required elements of a TRIP must address immediate and long-range planning activities and investments related to resilience, demonstrate a systemic approach to resilience, and include a risk-based assessment of vulnerabilities to current and future weather events and natural disasters. States and MPOs are invited to complete and submit one of these plans, so last year we began the process of putting one together. There are three main objectives for completing one of these plans. First, it can be used as an educational tool. The work of completing the various components of the trip brings COG member agencies together on how to assess and analyze the impacts of natural hazards at a regional scale, how to plan for the future, and share with one another innovative ways they are working on doing so in their own respective localities. Second, the act of completing a vulnerability assessment and putting together a resilience plan at a regional scale can help state, regional, and local leaders identify transportation assets that may be vulnerable and add to a potential case for investment in resilience measures to help protect that asset. And third, this plan can better position the region for federal funding and match reduction for resilience projects under the PROTECT program. Here is a broad overview of the schedule for the development of our trip. Over the summer, we completed the risk-based vulnerability assessment in two parts, a system-level screening assessment and an asset-level GIS analysis. In October, we held the first National Capital Area Regional Transportation Resilience Forum, where we convened over 60 planners, environmentalists, activists, and others from around the world, not world, the region, but the world too, to present the findings of our vulnerability assessment and discuss the remainder of the plan and request for resilience projects and solutions. The next section in this process timeline is the interactive map, which we have finalized and I will give a sneak peek of during this presentation. Not shown here on the timeline is the project request form and resilience project guidance document, which has been completed and has been made public for stakeholders to submit projects to, which leaves us with the draft and then final trip being completed and submitted to Federal Highway by the end of June 2024. And on this slide, the little boxes that have check marks are the ones that have been completed until now. And so we are just sort of left with the draft and final trip, which is the bulk of the work. So that will be completed over the winter and should be due at the end of the fiscal year. I wanted to take a moment to mention that stakeholder participation is super important with a project like this, especially since one of the major goals of this project is to coordinate resilience efforts in the transportation systems across the region. This means that we must include as many folks as we can to get feedback on the methodologies used, as well as input from localities and agencies on what their individual project plans are so they can be included in the regional plan. This will help us get a big picture view of how our region is approaching adaptation and resilience with regards to our transportation system. So far, we have had 2 working group meetings. Those are meetings with those stakeholders who are most involved in this project. And back in October, we held that larger forum with over 60 participants who represented organizations and agencies not only from the COG TPB region, but consultants and representatives from other regions who are in the process of scoping out their own resilience improvement plans and were looking to us for ideas and guidance as they begin their own projects. We will continue to include our important stakeholders as we close out this project with two more working group meetings and the eventual formation of a formal subcommittee once the working group completes its guidance over this project. Now I'll review the risk-based vulnerability assessment, which, as I said before, was completed in 2 phases. The first phase was a system-level analysis in which we looked at vulnerabilities of general transportation system asset types, roads and highways, bridges, public transit, active transport, airport, maritime, and stormwater systems to each of 5 natural hazards: extreme heat, inland flooding, coastal flooding, extreme winter, and extreme wind conditions. The goal in this phase was to identify areas and assets of greatest risk within the region, and it was done via a literature review focusing on consolidating information from existing climate studies in the region. The results of phase 1 of the assessment are shown in this matrix here, rated each asset hazard pair on a high to low scale. Since natural hazards can impact physical infrastructure and customers and service in different ways, you'll see those 2 types of impacts split out in the graphic. Due to schedule and scope constraints, not every asset hazard pair could move on to phase 2 of the vulnerability assessment, but those that were scored as high risk, which you can see here in the red, orange-y shaded color, all moved on to the next phase and are listed on this slide. They are extreme heat with public transit and active transport, inland flooding with roads and highways, bridges, public transit, and stormwater, coastal flooding with roads and highways, bridges, public transit, stormwater, and maritime, extreme winter with public transit and active transportation, and extreme wind with roads and highways and public transit. For those asset hazard pairs that were rated as high risk in phase 1, but were not well suited to a GIS-based analysis, we completed a qualitative literature review with a focus on historical trends and future conditions for each hazard, and noted previous events and impacts for each pair. The pairs that we completed a more in-depth literature review on are listed on the slide here in the blue square. They'll be part of the trip and final report, but they won't appear on the interactive mapping tool due to the lack of geospatial data for these assets or the hazards in the pairs. And for pairs that do have the available geospatial data, our consultants completed an asset-level GIS analysis using asset-specific data, exposure indicators, and criticality indicators to rate specific assets as high, medium, or low risk. And again, that's all within those that rated high risk in the phase 1 of the vulnerability assessment. The key climate data sets that were used in this analysis were land surface temperature for the extreme heat hazard pairs, FEMA 100 and 500-year floodplain maps for the inland flooding hazard pairs, and NOAA 2-foot sea level rise data set for coastal flooding hazards. We also weighted the scoring with criticality elements where it was appropriate. The COG equity emphasis area data was factored in for all asset hazard pairs. Functional class was included for roads and bridges, and detour length was included for bridges. Preliminary results of this assessment are ready and will be with the working group shortly for review, which we will be discussing at our 3rd meeting on January 29th. And since I haven't reviewed the results in detail with the working group yet, I won't go into too much detail today on those results analysis, but the interactive mapping tool is public and all are welcome to view it and play around with the layers, as I will briefly show in just a few minutes. For just a top-line summary of the results, rail lines had the greatest percentage of assets with high vulnerability to any hazard, and that was 11% of rail lines had a high vulnerability to inland flooding, which was followed by roads and highways, again, to inland flooding, and that was 5% of roads and highways were vulnerable, highly vulnerable to inland flooding. There were 8 public transit assets that have high vulnerability to extreme heat and inland flooding, and 2 of those assets also have high vulnerability to sea level rise. Tables and visuals that depict these results will be available in the final report, and I'm sure I'll be back in front of the board to present the final results of the study and next steps once the working group has approved everything. But as you can see with the few graphics I chose to include on the slide, the results will be portrayed in a variety of ways, from total number of miles of assets at risk to certain or multiple hazards to percentage of the total assets at risk. And the full report will dive deeper into differences by providers, by state, whether or not it's within an equity emphasis area, and a lot of other ways of slicing and dicing the data that I'm excited to take a look at and share with you all. As I've alluded to so far today, part of this project was to produce an interactive mapping tool in conjunction with the vulnerability assessment to live on the TPB ArcGIS website. The tool layers transportation asset, climate, and equity spatial data to depict highly vulnerable assets so agencies can evaluate their individual assets and services to understand how vulnerable they may be in the face of certain natural hazards. We received a lot of great feedback during the Regional Resilience Forum, specifically a few attendees identified some things like severe wind events and tree canopy as 2 layers that would be key for the mapping tool. So in response, the final mapping tool now has severe wind.
Yeah. You know the one in the hall?
Yeah, the double door.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can everyone, please, who is online, please mute themselves? Thank you.
Thank you. In response to that feedback, the final mapping tool now does have those severe wind events, which is represented in annualized frequency values and a tree canopy layer. Now, I'm going to go through a very quick demo to showcase a few of the capabilities of this new tool. Similar to Andy's presentation, for the sake of the user interface, I did include some screenshots of the tool over the next few slides with different layers on and off. And I will invite Leo to post a link in the chat of this meeting so you can find the link there to the live tool. It will also be in the link of these slides. should you look at them after this meeting, and it will be in the memo that was included in the meeting mail out. Lots of ways to get there. So this first slide shows all of the base asset layers, which we have rail routes, rail stops, bridges, bus stops, roads, and active transportation. And what you can see in the outline in the blue shaded area is, of course, the TPB boundaries. And for each one of these screenshots, I'm just going to hold for a few moments so you can just take a little bit of a look. So all of the light gray things in there, which will be some squares, dots, and lines, are all of those assets that are included. And on the right-hand side is the list of layers that can be turned on and off. Here we have inland flooding risk for rail routes. And so for rail routes, here we have Metro, MARC, Amtrak, VRE, and DC streetcar. And so there are the different colors there. You'll see green lines and yellow lines and red lines. And so the green segments are those that are low risk. The yellow segments are those that are medium risk, and the red are high risk. And the ones that aren't showing up are the ones that did not score as low, medium, or high. Because if you remember, we included all of the high risk elements in this. So the low is still high risk, but it is on the lower end of the risk. Here we have temperature risk score for rail routes and rail stops. So the rail stops, you'll see there are like little squares, and the routes are the lines again, green, yellow, and red. I know it's hard to see sort of like in the dense middle of DC, but on the tool online, you'll be able to zoom in, and you can sort of click on each square to get more, and the segment to get more information about who the operator is, what the actual stop might be, what the risk score is, all sorts of good information within each asset that you can click on. Here we have turned on equity emphasis areas, which are the light purple polygons, and inland risk flooding score for bus stops. Again, this just is sort of depicting all of the different ways you can use this tool to see different assets. And here we have inland flooding and sea level rise risk score for roads. And it just shows the roads that are at risk. And as well, there is the FEMA 100-year, 500-year floodplain and extreme flooding scenarios, which is some of the spatial data that shows up in the gray. So thanks for zooming in there. So this, if we can zoom back out, Kim. Thank you. Two features of this tool that I have circled, can you zoom all the way up? That I have circled here in red, I'm excited about because it allows us to get a little bit more information about what we're looking at. The circle on the upper right highlights what happens when a user clicks on the three little dots on the right-hand side of each layer. It will expand a drop-down menu that has two options: Details, which comes up first, which will open a new page with information about the data source, and Export, which shows up below Details, which will allow a user to export the layer to their own machine or system to potentially add it to a map of their own. This is a really great option for an agency or locality that has GIS maps or tools of their own and would be interested in overlaying some of the risk score layers from our study against theirs. Alternatively, in that same vein, as seen in the lower right corner of this slide, there's a button with the, that says click to add data, which will allow a user to add their own mapping layer to this tool for the same type of purpose. And that will only appear for the particular user that adds their data, not everyone who looks at the site. And it will go away if you close out of it, but you can always add it back in. And there's also a legend tab in the upper right that when activated shows what each color on the map means for the layers that are turned on. So it's useful to take a look at that to understand the tool a little bit more. And finally, there are a few layers in the tool that are purely hazard layers. They don't represent risk score for particular assets, but it can be helpful to view these layers like median surface temperature that I have shown here, overlaid with specific assets. Again, like I have bus stops at risk to temperature shown here in the small little dots. Should a user need to understand how a particular hazard might impact their area? Like I mentioned earlier, we also have wind and tree canopy layers, which of course aren't super high resolution, but can provide high-level guidance for various resilience project ideas. Again, I think Leo has the link to the mapping tool in the chat if you want to play around with it, so that's great. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please feel free to email me about this tool. We'd be happy to take a look at it and add anything that we may be able to. And the last element of the TRIP is the resilience project list. To be eligible for the match reduction under Protect, a resilience project must be prioritized in the resilience improvement plan. So we have created a project request form, which has been shared with transportation and resilience planners throughout the region to solicit project information. In addition to the project request form, the consultant has also created a guidance document that outlines how to define a good or reasonable resilience project, provides definitions for commonly used terms, which is basically just a guide for how to fill out the project request form, plus a primer on transportation resilience in case the form winds up on a desk of a planner who is not necessarily well-versed in resilience terminology. The projects collected during this effort should address, but are certainly not limited to, the identified priority vulnerabilities listed in the vulnerability assessment. The table included on this slide is just a snapshot of the criteria for defining a good resilience project that is included in the guidance document. We have already collected about a dozen projects, and the submission period will be open until the end of January and possibly into the middle of February if stakeholders need a little bit more time to submit. If you or anyone you work with has any project ideas that you might want to submit for Protect funding for, please send them to this form so we can have them represented in the plan and both allow them to qualify for that match reduction, but also help us get a good sense of resilience work going on in the region. And finally, some next steps. We are continuing to collect resilience project submissions. Again, I could use your help in continuing to get these materials into the hands of planners at various agencies and localities who may be involved at the project level and would want to submit a project to this resilience plan. The form shouldn't take about more than 10 minutes to complete, if that is any help. The schedule for the rest of the project will include 2 more working group meetings, one at the end of this month and then probably another one in the spring, reviewing the draft TRIP and finalizing that document once it's complete. And again, I'm sure I'll be back in front of this committee to present once we are closer to that point. And of course, I will continue to collaborate with our stakeholders on this project. And there will be more to come about setting up a formal subcommittee once this phase of the project is over and the working group sunsets. And lastly, one important section of this TRIP is titled Future Improvements, which will document a lot of the challenges we came across during the course of the vulnerability assessment and plan formulation and recommended solutions for those moving forward. This list of future improvements will directly inform the projects and work we will take on in the future under Transportation Resilience Planning Program. We have so many great ideas and I'm really excited to start bringing them to fruition. So that concludes my presentation for today. And if there's if there's time, I can take questions.
Thank you, Catherine. We are running a little bit behind schedule. We like to end our meetings on time. Does anyone have any immediate questions? If not, we would certainly advise folks to shoot Catherine an email.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. All right. Last month, as part of the director's report, Conti informed us that there's a new federal requirement for entities like us. So Eric Randall on staff will provide a briefing on the recent federal rulemaking that implements a performance measure for state DOTs and MPOs to adopt greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and track progress. I understand that these are different from the goals we already have adopted. So I'll turn the floor over to Eric so he can give a little bit of details about what we have to do.
Right.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm here to brief you about the new rulemaking, both that was mentioned during public comment at the start of this meeting and is just introduced by the chair. I'm going to talk about the PPP process. This is the same process under which the board last month set highway and transit safety targets. So it's part of an all-encompassing across the transportation field, a set of performance measures and targets that the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration require of state DOTs, MPOs, and transit agencies. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Erin Morrow. I'll be presenting today talking about the process, but Erin will be the staff member actually leading this work, and she'll be the one briefing you in future months as we move through this new requirement and activity. So here's my presentation outline today. I'll cover the final rule, talk about what state DOTs and MPOs have to do, and then what this means for the TPB. Then I'll just briefly touch on some of implementing this rulemaking and how we go about it for state DOTs and MPOs, and talk about next steps and schedules. So on November 22nd, which was the day before Thanksgiving, Federal Highway Administration announced this notice of final rulemaking. It had been proposed in 2022, and now they finally finalized it. And in many ways, they're bringing back a rule that was originally proposed back in 2016 and tentatively became effective in January 2017, only to be quickly overturned by the incoming administration. So we'll see what happens with politics this year as well. Anyway, the final rule was published in the Federal Register on December 7th, became effective last Monday, January 8th, requires state DOTs and MPOs to set declining targets for carbon dioxide emissions on the national highway system. So that's your interstate and your major arteries. We're not talking about all roads or across the region, just on the national highway system. And as a base year, reference year, uses calendar year 2022. So the new rule requires state DOTs to establish initial targets by February 1st in just a couple weeks. They have to submit an initial report to Federal Highway Administration, all 50 states, plus District of Columbia and other applicable territories. Normally, the rule requires 4-year and 2-year targets, much as many of the other PBPP rules do. But for this initial period, only 4-year targets are required. For the current quadrennial 4-year period we're in for PPPP, which is 2022 through 2025. So they'll essentially be setting targets for the end of 2025. And then performance against these targets would first be reported in October 2026, when reports are due on the current quadrennial period. A little confusing. So we have a couple years, though, till we find out how we're actually doing against targets that DOTs and MPOs will be establishing now. As with other PPP requirements, MPOs have up to 180 days following state DOTs to establish our own targets, in this case, 4-year targets. We have to establish targets for our metropolitan planning area, as well as for each urban area greater than 200,000 population. So with our 3 urban areas, only Washington, D.C. urban areas greater than 200,000. So we just have that one urban area target, but I'll get more to that later. As with other PPP targets, we can either support the state DOT's target or establish our own quantitative targets. And the TPB has historically always adopted our own quantitative targets because we're a large MPO and because of our unique geography. However, urban areas with portions of the national highway system that fall within more than one metropolitan planning area must have joint quantitative targets. So that includes Baltimore and FAMPO. More about that soon. So what this means for the TPB, we need to adopt 4-year targets for the period 2022 to 2025, no later than this July. We would not need to adopt 3 targets, one for our metropolitan planning area, one for the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia urban area, which would also have to be adopted by Baltimore and the Fredericksburg MPOs to our north and south respectively, because our urban area overlaps into their metropolitan planning areas, and vice versa, the Maryland urban area overlaps slightly into our metropolitan planning area. So we'll let BRTB take the lead on developing that target, but we'll counter approve whatever they come up with, just as we'll take the lead on the first 2 targets, and we'll all come together to get everything approved in time and meet the requirement. So stepping back for a moment, a year and a half ago, as has already been noted again earlier today, the TPB adopted a resolution with the greenhouse gas reduction goals. From the perspective of those goals established by the TPB, They are quite different from this federal required measure. The federal measure only applies to emissions on the national highway system, again, those interstates and major arteries. Uses a different reference year, 2022, which is quite recent. It's a target for a 4-year period, so the target we'll be establishing will be through 2025, and only applies to carbon dioxide, though carbon dioxide does make up the vast majority of transportation regulations. So when we come back in another half year to talk about this, what you see as a target is going to probably be pretty small compared to the very large goals that have been established under reductions. But we'll see all that in a few months. So the federal requirement does not actually provide any guidelines except that targets must be declining. So state DOTs and MPOs can develop these targets however they want to based on their own policies, their own priorities, so long as they are declining. So they have to be a negative percentile. However, state DOTs must use a prescribed formula for calculating emissions. So when they go and calculate their emissions for 2022, that base year, they have to follow a very specified process. They take 3 data elements, one coming from Federal Highway Administration, one motor fuel consumption for each state, and this is a statistic that has been reported by state DOTs for years. And similarly, they have to use vehicle miles traveled, VMT data, again, a statistic that has been reported by state DOTs for years. So a very prescribed system that will then spit out their performance for 2022, and upon which they'll then base future performance and their declining targets. As with most of the PBP process, and specifically for this rule, there are no penalties or incentives associated with actual performance versus targets. MPOs have even more flexibility than the state DOTs. We can adopt the state DOT formula using a proportionate share or proxy share of the VMT that takes place within our metropolitan area or within our urban area. Federal Highway, again, the italics are the actual rulemaking there. We can use other methods, and Federal Highway proposes either using the MOVES emissions factors or the EARPAT model that Federal Highway Administration has promulgated, or any other method that we can demonstrate has validity and useful results for measuring CO2. Any such tool or model we use has to be approved by the state DOTs that are our oversight agencies, as well as our partners. But we have a great deal of flexibility. So we're going to explore quite a few things as we look forward to how to implement this rule. So over the next several months, we're going to coordinate with state DOTs and our adjoining MPOs, again, Baltimore and Fredericksburg. We already had one call last month just to discuss what everybody's doing. As the state DOTs in just the next couple weeks finish off their data and establish their targets, we're going to look at their data, look at whatever methodology they used for target development, and we're going to research the options available for the TPB and for the 3 targets we have to set, how we could determine targets through 2025 and coordinate with Fredericksburg and Baltimore, as well as the state DOTs and what we're doing and how we might develop targets that are coordinated with those of the states, or how much we might go out on our own process. So next several months, again, my colleague Aaron Marr will be leading much of this traffic. We'll bring results back to the technical committee and then to the TPB in May is our plan, with hopefully draft targets by that point, and hope that the TPB will adopt these targets in June. As a final note, I will note that when this rule came out, a lawsuit was immediately filed by up to 21 states now. And one of the states that is signatory to that lawsuit is the state of Virginia. So we'll see how politics may play out on this rulemaking over the next few months, or indeed next year. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Does anybody have any quick questions? All right. We have one last thing on the agenda. Lynn assures me that she could do this in 3 minutes or less, so please sit tight. I understand that the 2020 census data has resulted in some changes to our urban area boundaries, which now require some changes in the some changes to TPB membership. So Lynn will brief us on this. Lynn, take it away.
Great, thanks. So Kim's bringing up the map, as Ms. Henderson mentioned, and we have new census information. I just want to take you guys back to 2010, when 2010 census information was released. If you look at the map on the left side in the Fauquier County area, which is west and sort of in the southern end, Fauquier County was added in. Their urban area, what used to be called urbanized area, was found to be contiguous with ours. When the 2020 census information was released, it takes a couple years to catch up. We're now there. That former urbanized area is actually still urban. It's just no longer contiguous with the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia urban area. What does that mean for us? Well, it means Fauquier has a choice. So statutorily speaking, they're no longer required to be part of the Transportation Planning Board. So they have evaluated their options and worked with the Virginia Department of Transportation, and they have submitted a letter of request to no longer be a member of the TPB. So Virginia has also circled this with its localities and at headquarters, and so they have asked the TPB to remove Fauquier County as a member. So in your packet there, what do we have to do to make that happen? We need a bylaws amendment, and that's basically all we need to do. So in your memo, it describes what we need to do. We've attached a proposed bylaws amendment, which is very simply just to remove Fauquier as a member and to change the maps. Going forward, we will use the new maps once the board approves it in all of the required documents. We're not going to retroactively amend any of the documents that need them. One of them is the planning agreement. Again, moving forward, we will be using the map on the right once the board actually approves the request, and that we will be asking the TPB to take this up in February. There will be a resolution and a bylaws amendment. With that, I'm happy to take any questions. And Fauquier County is also, Mr. Adam Schellenberger is also on the line along with VDOT in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, does anybody have any questions about that? Census data is the census data. I always hate to lose someone, but it is what it is. Okay, so we had a lot that was covered in these last 2 hours. Again, we'd like to begin and end on time. So this concludes our meeting for today. The next meeting is scheduled for February 21st, 2024. Please be on the lookout for those packets and look forward to chatting with you all next month. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.